As we mentioned, it's wonderful to be with all of you this morning. Very excited for continuing our study. I hope you're here ready to go. I feel like, and if I had the right words to say, to thank you all on behalf of our family, I'm not sure what they are, but just know that the best thanks I know to do for you all is keep working hard at this study that we're doing and just growing in our excitement and love for God. So we are in Ecclesiastes, the 4th chapter. We are going to see 5 different scenes in this chapter, and they all tend to at first look a little bit random, but each one of them is connected in a different way that we want to be able to see. And one of them, and only one of them, is going to specifically, the writer will omit the idea that it comes with vanity. All the other 4 of them are still going to come with vanity. So we want to be able to identify, discover that, and then we'll be looking at the first part of chapter 5 this morning as well. Changing it up just a little bit this time. Usually we take our 5, 6, 7 minutes to look at the text, and my hope is that we're going to do that once we get to chapter 5. But I'm going to read the verses for each section, and then we're going to open it up and discuss it. So we're picking up after verses 1 through 3, seeing the oppression that is done under the sun. So these scenes are going to kind of start with this extreme worst-case scenario and then go from there. Now we're going to be picking up in verse 4. I'm going to read verse 4 through 6. I saw, and by the way, we're on page 7 of our textual booklet, and if you would like one, all you need to do is raise your hand. I can see some more booklets left in the back. Verse 4. I saw that all labor and all skillful work is due to a man's jealousy of his friend. This too is futile in a pursuit of the wind. The fool folds his arms and consumes his own flesh. Better 1 handful with rest than 2 handfuls with effort and a pursuit of wind. All right. Thoughts and comments on this text or questions? Yes, sir.
Verse 4 is very fitting. I mean, how many of us, as soon as our neighbor mows their yard or blows their leaf, we have to get out there and do the exact same thing? You know, it's so true that many of the things we do are a result of what we see other neighbors trying to keep up with that.
Indeed. I struggled with these 3 verses more than, I'd say, pretty high up there in the 6 weeks that we've had this class. Maybe this will be helpful. I kind of compared this, or maybe we could compare these verses to this idea that we all have heard pretty often, and that is the American dream, which of course is, as the preacher shows, especially in verse 4, it's a complete lie. When you think of the American dream, let's just take someone for example. The guy, I think his name's Sam Walton, or what's the Johnny Bass Pro guy. When we think about those people who are just ordinary people, and because of their blessing, God blessing them and their skillful work, they've been able to grow into incredible success. Everyone is jealous of them. How ridiculous is that? It's pretty pathetic. The American dream is one man is jealous over another man's success. That's it in a nutshell. And so if we think that there's fulfillment in hard work, skillful effort, and success under the sun, there isn't, because every single person that does succeed is jealous and hated or coveted by his neighbors. That's very, very vain. By contrast, the fool is folding his arms, sitting back, doing nothing. Better is one handful with rest than two pursuing the wind. Any final thoughts or comments on this section?
What is the phrase, consumes his own flesh?
I was hoping for not too many questions on this one. The first thing that I would know to do would be to compare with other translations. So the NIV, the fool folds their hands and ruins themselves. My understanding of it, which is still growing, is this would be the opposite of the person. If someone is coveted and people are so jealous of their success, instead I'm just going to sit back and do nothing, and so I just waste away because I don't do anything. I don't know if anybody has any other. Yes, Linda?
Do you think everybody that is successful or is wealthy has truly been blessed by God? I mean, some of them achieve that by deceitful ways.
Yes, that's a good question. Maybe the question would be, do they realize that they've been blessed by God? Because we're all pulling in air right now that we breathe because of God. So, great observation. No, I would say most have. They don't see that. So, good. Let's keep going. Okay. Verses 7 through 8. Again, I saw the futility under the sun. There's a person without a companion, without even a son or a brother, and there is no end to, and though there is no end to all his struggles, his eyes are still not content with riches. So who am I struggling for, he asks, and depriving myself from good? This too is futile and a miserable task. Okay, who is this man? In your words. What's he doing? What's he busy doing?
He's just working unendingly.
Yes. Absolutely. So the preacher turns from the man who's skillful and successful that everyone's jealous of. Now you've got a man who's skillful, only this time he's completely alone. And he doesn't seek out anything or anyone else other than his own monetary gain. And the great shame of it all, the preacher specifically says his eyes were never satisfied with his riches. At the end of the day, all he can say is, why did I do it? What did I gain? This idea of the vanity of pursuing wealth was first introduced back in chapter 2 and verse 8. But this is going to be very prevalent throughout Ecclesiastes. And a major theme and danger, the tendency for us to seek fulfillment in wealth is so powerful, especially in the country that we live in. And as we mentioned already once before, I do not need to be rich to love money. Some of the people who love money the most have what we would say not much. But money is pretty much all they talk about if you listen to them. That's what they're doing. There'd be plenty of quotes that we could read from rich and famous people who literally say, I had it all and I didn't have it. So instead of reading all those quotes, over and over and over, you can just find them. They're constant. Matthew 16:26. Look at how Jesus puts this two different ways here. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Or what can a man gain in exchange for his soul? So you see, he paints it from two different angles, and neither of which, two different angles to hammer home the point. This is Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 17. Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. We saw this idea first in chapter 2. There's nothing better. Apart from God, if eternity is on our minds, whatever we have to eat, whatever it is that you like, there's nothing better. Unless it's vegetable soup, I won't be eating that. But there's nothing better. We aren't missing anything out there because when we have eternity in mind, we are now able to enjoy whatever we have because we can say, this is what God's given me. I'm thrilled. He could have given me nothing. He could have given me more. But it doesn't matter because it's from His hand, and I couldn't be more thankful for it. Any other thoughts and comments on that? Yes, Dave.
Just real quick on the comment of how God's using the image of food and feasting and how it's in this realm. And He pulls on the appetite and how we're trying to get away from the appetite of this world by seeing these things that are temporal, that are going to be left behind. And hopefully seeing as what God's intention is for us to see the bigger appetite, something that's going to satisfy forever. I think that's really interesting how God uses that as something that we experience even now, of a hunger, of an appetite, of a lust or enviness of other things. He pulls that towards us.
Indeed. Brian?
This section in 7 and 8 just describes such a lowly person, someone who's working to the neglect of family, maybe neglect of health, neglect of God, and it's just an incredibly lonesome journey.
Outstanding. On point. I had seen Ryan 2's hand and then Nick. You're Ryan 1, Ryan 2, Ryan 3.
I think it's funny how this is kind of showing there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, like, right now, the main political conversations are, you got all these, like, super rich people, and there's a counterculture against them, like anti-capitalism and stuff like that, because they see that some of these super rich people are never satisfied. They're just trying to get more, like the corruption of the politician and stuff like that. And then, but the reaction is born out of this jealousy we're talking about, and it's born out of a wrong focus. It's born out of how do I get my peace now, as opposed to what we're talking about with, be happy with what you have, with God, with the food you eat,
Yep, and a couple of you have already touched on what's going to be the main theme of this. We're just going to discover that here. Nick, and then we're going to move on.
This might be a sin, but I've already started listening to Christmas music, so my brain is already in the Christmas mood. And so I read these verses, and I think of one of my favorite Christmas stories, which is A Christmas Carol. Like, this is Ebenezer Scrooge. If you ever read that book or seen any of the movies where it's like a man who has no family, no one to take care of, just this lust and this pursuit of money, and it's like, what is it all for? And that's contrasted with the Cratchits and Tiny Tim, who are poor, but they have family and they have each other, and it's just this stark contrast, which is exactly what these verses are describing.
Great observation. We're going to skip verse 9 through 12. We're going to come back to that at the end. Verse 13 to the end. Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king, who no longer pays attention to warnings. For he came from prison to be king, even though he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who move about under the sun follow a second youth who succeeds him. There is no limit to all the people who were before them, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. Okay. Sometimes the translations can make this just a little bit confusing or clear. We're just talking about two individuals here. First, we have this poor but wise youth, and secondly, we have this old but foolish king. Can you describe the scene that takes place with these two? Yes, sir.
The old
poor but wise youth, because he's going to do the same thing to that king. And it's just going to keep on rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling. I think that's what's happening.
Now, that doesn't happen today, right? Ha ha.
One fool is replaced by another.
Yes, but maybe they didn't start that way. Now, what was it that made the old king foolish? Did you see that in verse 13?
Doesn't listen to warnings.
Not even anything to address who the author is of Ecclesiastes. I cannot help but think about Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 11, God tells Solomon, I'm going to tear your kingdom away from you. And instead of acting like his father did, he holds on to it all the more. Tries to kill the next, Jeroboam. Danger, danger, danger for us. As we grow, as we age, do not heed and listen to warnings. But also, how can we not fail to see the insecurity of a high station? You think you're safe when you get that promotion? Do you think you're safe when you get elected? Do you think you're safe when you're whatever we think that we are, that we're secure? We are not. We can be replaced. I don't care who you are. We will all, especially if we turn to foolishness and don't continue to listen, we will all fall into this trap. The book of Kings is primarily trying to teach the danger for us Christians today of the trappings. How many times do we see kings, and it scares me to death, they start off so well, and they get to their old age, and they turn away from the Lord or from good advice. They're lifted up with pride. Danger, danger, danger. But also, the fickleness of popularity. Just because everybody votes for you now, they won't later. People's allegiances blow with the wind. There's nothing to be, there's no fulfillment or profit in that. People like Hezekiah, Josiah, Samson, even David himself, although he repented, made some incredibly massive mistakes later in their life. Any final thoughts on that before we move? Maria and Ian, and then we'll move on.
I just think this verse made me think of just with the foolish king compared to the poor wise child, just the potential for harm that the king can do, that this foolishness is not just isolated to himself, but he's in this position of power where he's ruling over people, and if he's not, you brought up the word danger several times, and so, that's not just danger to himself, but because he has all these subjects underneath him, and this kingdom to rule, if he's not making the proper decisions, it's not only affecting him, and in most respects, it's probably going to have more effect on those people, because they don't have the resources to protect themselves from poor decisions that are made, whereas he has sort of more than likely that safety net to some degree.
Right.
And so, so this isn't just about someone, so when you think about someone who's being foolish, it typically is not just going to impact their lives, but that foolishness is going to have a ripple effect.
Absolutely. Same scene at the top of the page, the act of the terrible ruler who is oppressing everybody. Ian, then we'll move on.
Yeah.
Very good observation. Excellent.
Yeah, we might not be secure on our jobs because we might lose our job or whatever. But when we're baptized and all that, we're secure with God because He always takes care of us, and He always is like, if you obey Me, you're gonna have a hope in heaven. So don't worry about what happens on earth.
Great point, Ian. All right, now we're going to hop right into verse 9 through 12. Two are better than one. Did you see the theme in all of these scenes? You've got the vanity of aloneness. You've got the person who is oppressing others, the person who has been successful and is now alone because everybody envies them, the lazy man. You have the workaholic who is completely alone and cut everyone off from him. Then you have the old king who is alone and the youth who is alone. Listen to this. 2 are better than 1 because they have good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up, but pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they can keep warm, but how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, 2 can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Real quick, let's list the advantages that the preacher gives for 2 over 1. What did you see? They support each other?
Good reward.
That was the first one. They have an even better reward. Next. They lift each other up. They keep each other encouraged. What else? They can overcome obstacles that the one could not do. What are some ways that you can think of throughout the Bible? Let me back up before I ask that. This idea of being alone is a very human nature type thing. Our nature is we are self-centered, not other-centered. And the problem with much of the allurement of fulfillment in this life under the sun is we end up isolating one another while we're pursuing it. My relationship with you, with our spouses, gets pushed to the side as we seek fulfillment under the sun, creating our own world in a sense. By contrast to this, when we are living in light of eternity, with a higher purpose and a higher value in mind, we're constantly striving to avoid self-centeredness and isolation by cultivating friendships and partnerships with others. This automatically fights back our tendency to seek profit under the sun, causes us to instead be more considerate of our fellow man, having an eternal mindset. Does that make sense? Can you think of some godly, biblical, spiritual relationships of 2 that are better than 1?
I just read Samuel, second Samuel, the last time Jonathan and David saw each other, and it said Jonathan encouraged David to be strengthened by God.
Excellent. That just makes me think, what we're talking about here isn't just, hey, let's be friends and, having friends is better. The 2 who have a higher value in mind are better than the 1. The 2 that have God at the focus of their relationship, David and Jonathan, are an excellent example. What other relationships? Nick?
Moses and Aaron.
Excellent. Nick?
I was thinking of the limited commission that Jesus sends him out.
Absolutely. Sends out the 72, 2 by 2. Yes.
I think Priscilla and Aquila who went and taught Apollos a better way.
Paul never went anywhere alone without taking somebody with him because he understood this concept. This is very difficult. We have in our minds, we're told that independence is good. This is almost ingrained in us since birth. And there's such a great danger and vanity of trying to pursue distancing ourselves from one another because, as Proverbs mentions, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. I cannot be who I need to be without one another. I think maybe Mr. Mackey and then Paul. Did you raise your hand or scratch your? Scratch, Paul.
I just think from a broader perspective, Adam was good and Eve.
That was at the top of the list. It's not good for man to be alone. Ding, ding, ding. That doesn't mean that Adam needed a sidekick. No. He would have ruined his life if he was alone, and so would Eve. Matter of fact, they both did by independently doing what they did with the serpent. Okay, shepherds of local bodies. You don't ever see a plurality. Over and over and over, this idea of aloneness. Great danger, great vanity. Great thoughts and observations. We need to get to chapter 4 next, or chapter 5. Chapter 5. Just a fair warning. This lesson is very uncomfortable and challenging for us here in this room. So, for the sake of time, we're going to address this the same pattern that we did. I'm going to read through the text. We're going to go through our initial observations, and then we are going to get right into this because there is so much here. Okay, let's see. Get myself where I need to be. Chapter 5, verse 1 through 7. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Better to draw near in obedience than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they ignorantly do wrong. Do not be hasty to speak. Do not be impulsive to make a speech before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, so let your words be few. For dreams result from much work, and a fool's voice from many words. When you make a vow, don't delay in fulfilling it, because he does not delight in fools. Fulfill what you vow. Better that you do not vow than you vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth bring guilt on you, and do not say in the presence of the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry with your words and destroy the work of your hands? For many dreams bring futility, so do many words. First off, look carefully at this. There's a major shift that's taken place in the preacher's literary focus. Can you discover the new? First of all, can you see it? What do you see? Caution?
He's addressing our relationship to God. Previously, it's been our relationship to other humans.
Excellent.
And I also see, like, prior to this pointing at other people, he's giving examples, and how he's shifting his attention to you.
You've been reading your Bible, I see. That's an excellent observation. How could we miss that? This is the first time he uses the word you. 11 times. The beginning of the Bible, or the beginning of the book, this preacher, and remember, Ecclesiastes is a little bit of a misleading title. We talked about this in the first class. It's one who calls an assembly, comparable to the Latin word for ecclesia, group of people called out, just to listen to a very important message. And the preacher, or Koheleth as he calls himself, is delivering this message. He's referred to himself as I multiple times. Now, he refers directly to his audience and says you. What's the significance and message of that? Somebody writes you a letter, good friend. They're talking about themselves, and all of a sudden they start addressing you. Yes, Dave?
It seems like I'm taking it on the perspective of how he's been writing it. This is what I've investigated, this is what I've scientifically researched, and now the culmination of that, this is how I'm going to apply it to you. And it lends itself to, with all of this understanding and knowledge, now he's transitioning and flipping a switch almost. This is how you're going to worship God.
okay? We're still, think about the structure of the book. First 6 chapters are looking at on this great search and seeing all the vanity. So he's hitting all these different areas. Now he's in the area of religion, but he changes how he delivers his message. It's really important to see that. He could have said, you don't be seeking fulfillment in riches, and you don't do this. Did you notice, too, by the way that he speaks, what does this automatically tell us about his audience? He's talking to them about going into the house of God. So by process of elimination, are these people religious or not religious? They're religious. The idea here is, this part's really serious. You, audience, you need to listen to this carefully. Just for fun, go through the book and see the natural progression. I just circled you. It's really cool to look at it through the rest of the book. Really starts to see how he starts to unfold and make his message pop. Compare it with the usage of the word I. And then finally, compare it with the word who, to really get an idea of how the Holy Spirit has crafted this message for maximum effect. You, I, who. In other words, I'm challenging all of us. Okay, now that we see where his attention has shifted to, let's have a quick pop quiz. If Ecclesiastes is being written during a late date Persian occupation, sometimes referred to as post-exilic Israel, then which 3 books of the Bible are we going to be, history books are we going to be in from a timeline standpoint? Well, Kevin's going to heaven. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Good job. Now for the real bonus points. Which 3 prophets are speaking at this time? Haggai and Zechariah, and then finally Malachi. I don't think that's how you say it, but what is going on for the people of Israel right now? Remember, God never sent a prophet to the people and just for the purpose of telling them, you're doing a really good job. The prophets were to warn, rebuke, encourage. What was going on with the people at this time? What kind of sins were they committing? Nehemiah chapter 13, no one was bringing any tithing into the temple. And so you know what happened because of that? The priests are out working secular work and not teaching the scriptures. Major, major problem. The Sabbath is being treated like a normal workday. God's message through Malachi, stop offering me your lame and blind animals. No one would accept that, and I certainly would not. Furthermore, people are crying, flooding God's altar with tears, saying, why? Why are we in this difficult situation? Ecclesiastes 7 verse 10, don't say, why were the former days better than these? And then finally, the people attend worship only as a means to an end. They treat God like a genie in the bottle. We'll come to church as long as you give us the goodies in life. God's response to this: shut the doors of the temple. Stop lighting useless fires on my altar. I am not pleased with you, and I will not accept your burnt offering. This idea of formalism in worship has been the plague of mankind since Cain and Abel. We often think Cain's offering was unacceptable to God because it came from the soil, course, the Bible never says that. God wasn't pleased with Cain and his offering, both Cain and his offering. And later, the offerings from the soil are commanded in Leviticus. No, it's this idea of formalism in worship, which is a symptom of a much deeper sin, the sin of idolatry. A person that's expecting too much out of life under the sun is automatically going to worship God in vain. We are totally going to run way out of time. The writer is going to give us 4 commands and 4 reasons. In verse 1, ESV literally translates this better to draw near to listen, which is literally what it means, to listen. Holman Christian Standard is obedience, but does not fit the context either, because all the context is talking about speaking. Imagine if we were to put one of those, road construction hazard signs out that just says, warning, whoever's going to come in here, this area is only for those who listen, learn, and grow. No sacrifices of fools allowed. It's interesting that we stress attendance in our worship. However, the Bible most frequently warns against coming to worship with the wrong heart. It's obvious, as we mentioned, Koheleth's audience does not have a problem with attending worship. His concern is that they are offering the worship of fools. So you see there's 2 kinds of worshipers in the text. Those who draw near to hear, those who offer the sacrifice of fools. It's been well said that God gave man 2 ears, but only 1 mouth. James chapter 1 and verse 19, my brothers, let everyone be quick to hear and slow to speak. We see this happen. We've done this. You ever said a prayer and you realize when you're done, literally you talked the whole time, but you never actually once did your conscience connect with God. It's like when you meet people sometimes and their eyes never meet you, but they're talking to you. It kind of gives you the creeps. That's what we do sometimes. And our prayers sometimes are all ask, us. And not thanksgiving to God, being in awe of God, or just telling God how impressed we are. That's the attitude that Jesus described of the publican in Luke chapter 18. The man couldn't lift his eyes up to heaven. He was so disgusted with himself and so impressed with God. Jesus says, that man went home justified. The Pharisee went home condemned. Offering the sacrifice of listening, offering the sacrifice of a fool. Another way to think about this is you just think about somebody that you really respect in your life. Whenever you get in the same room with them, what do? You can barely speak because you're like, oh. And all you want to do is listen to the wisdom that they have to say. Exactly. Why wouldn't we treat God the same way? You can even see this. This can even happen in an entire worship service. From the outside, it's alive. But everything is entirely focused on what the church has to say, what they're going to do. And somehow neglected is being silent and hearing what God has to say, being in awe of what he has to do. This is an interesting thought. You and I, we can't worship what we're not in awe of. We can't. Jesus said this in probably more direct words than any other prophet in the Bible when he spoke to a group of the so-called most religious people in the world in John 6. He said, no one comes to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. And those people could not understand why he had a problem with their worship. He said, "You've never seen me. You're of your father, the devil." You see, we can't truly worship if we're not truly in love with God. That's what Jesus was saying. How do we fall in love with God? The Father has to draw us, which is a very, it's very simple. Our relationships with each other, our spouse. How did you fall for the person? Somebody came and told you? I remember many people told me over and over again, you should date Sarah. Sorry. Of course, it just turned me away completely. The best advice I ever heard was from someone that doesn't even live here. They just said, just get to know her. Just hang out. Voila. She's amazing. It's not any different than God. Hey, has anybody been to a good restaurant lately, by the way? Did you tell anybody about it? I heard a mm-hmm. Yeah, nobody told you to do that. Exactly. We went to Texas Roadhouse, which I scoffed at, and the $30 steak was so good enough, it made the $75 steaks that I've had at other places disgusting. And dinner only cost me like 160 some bucks for like 3 families. That was perfect. You see, we worship what we are impressed by. When we want to talk about something, it's natural. But we have to listen. Can you think of any ways, and we're totally going to run out of time, actually it's about to go off, biblical ways that a church can and needs to avoid formalism in worship? Sorry, I've been talking quite a bit. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely. This turns into a college class and not an exciting environment because we're impressed with what God has to say. I'm sorry, Dave. I'm going to say the last thing, then you can. 1 Timothy 4:13. Until I come, give yourself to the public reading of Scripture, preaching, and teaching. Give yourself over to listening, being in awe and impressed with what God has done. We have to be so careful that it does not become an academic endeavor. This is not. Yes, sir. And that's it.